Welcome everybody to this second workshop in our series from the Research Infrastructure Core. This workshop is titled How CBPR Transformed Me. So before we dive into today's workshop, I wanted to introduce the core members of the Research Infrastructure Core to you all. Last time we met everybody, but I think it's also a good opportunity for us to reintroduce ourselves to you. So I am Cecilia Chung. I am an associate professor in the Department of Psychology. My role in the Research Infrastructure Core is mainly consultation. So I meet with researchers who have questions about research designs as well as statistical analyses. And then next, we have Sam Ying. I'm not sure if Sam is available to speak. Oh, okay, great, Sam.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam. As it says, I'm an assistant professor. I'm in the Department of Environmental Science, and I am the core lead for the Research Infrastructure Core here at HDR. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Sam. And next, we have Pamela.
Thanks, Cecilia. Hi, everyone. I'm Pamela Scheffler. I'm a postdoctoral scholar in psychology, and I study motivational factors and learning across the lifespan. As part of the HDR Research Infrastructure Core, I create statistics learning materials, and I also help UCR researchers with their study designs and their statistical analysis.
Great, thank you, Pamela. We also have another member in the team, Jenna, who's unable to join us today. So Jenna is the CEO of HARC, the Health Assessment and Research for Communities. You actually meet Jenna again pretty soon in one of our upcoming workshops. And for today, we also have a special guest, which I'll introduce later today. Let's see. All right, so once again, I wanted to present to you the workshop schedule for those of you who are new today, who join us for the first time. So this is a series of workshops that we are creating for researchers interested in getting into CBPR, community-based participatory research. And 2 weeks ago, we already held our first workshop, called Fall in Love with CBPR, where we briefly introduced to you all, what CBPR research is, and what are some of the benefits as well as challenges in conducting this type of research. And today we're very excited to actually, have this workshop on, basically an anecdotal experience sharing on how CBPR can transform researchers. And in 2 weeks from today, we're going to hold workshop number 3, where we'll be walking you through some of the nuts and bolts on human subjects research, as well as how we can navigate the ILB process. And I also wanted to highlight some upcoming workshops, workshop 4 through 6, which we'll be announcing the dates very soon, but just to give you an overview about what we'll be covering. So we'll dive into some research methods and data analytic tools in workshop number 4. And then we'll also get into some hands-on work with some data in workshop 5. And last but not least, we're going to have a in-person workshop in the spring quarter, where we'll be bringing people together to meet with each other, and also to share with one another what cool research you're doing involving CBPR. All right, so stay tuned for the dates, but you should already have on your calendar 2 weeks from today, March 14th, our workshop number 3 on human subject research and ILB process. I also would like to take some time to highlight some resources that we have at HDR. Some of you are familiar with this YouTube channel, and some of you haven't really been exposed to this resource. So I wanted to let you all know that we have excellent YouTube videos on research involving HDR, involving community-based practices. In that channel, you also would find important resources on grant writing, as well as some additional information about how you get started on community-based research. Our last workshop, Fall in Love with CBPR, which is workshop number 1, is also available on that channel. In case you missed it, or in case you wanted to review some of the things that we talked about last time. And another resource that I would like to highlight today for you is that the Research Infrastructure Core has a web page, which is actually housed in the main web page of the HDR at UCR web page. So in that website, I would like to highlight 2 really nice resources that you may or may not be aware of. So the first resource is that we have a link in that website to another web page called Advanced Statistics series. So in that web page, you actually find tutorials. Those are really brief tutorials on how you conduct advanced statistical analyses. Topics include structural equation modeling, hierarchical linear modeling, and other topics as well. And the second link that you will find under the Research Infrastructure Core website is a link to the Social Science Statistical Support request form. By clicking on that link, you actually see a form where you can submit a request to meet with either myself or Pamela, who will be able to answer questions that you might have about research designs, as well as what types of statistical analyses you might use for your data. So with all these advertising being said, I think we're ready to dive into today's topic, which is how CBPR can transform researchers. So like I said, last time in workshop number 1, we already walked you through some of the challenges as well as benefits of CBPR, as well as what exactly is CBPR. However, some lingering questions that you might still have is, well, I already have my own program of research. Why venture into CBPR? Right? It seemed like it's a lot of work, or maybe now you're convinced that you would like to start CBPR or incorporate some of these practices in your own research. You might still have questions about where you even begin. So in today's workshop, we'll be actually touching on these questions in depth, in greater details. And so, hopefully we'll be able to, address some of the concerns that you might still have about CBPR. So today, we're really delighted to have a guest today with us. In talking about how CBPR transform researchers, we're really delighted to have Professor Kalina Michalska with us today. Let me just take a moment to introduce Professor Michalska to you. So Dr. Kalina Michalska is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at UCR. Her research focuses on how the brain supports social and emotional development from childhood through adolescence and into adulthood. She is a prolific scholar and has published widely in the field of developmental neuroscience. In recent years, Dr. Michalska has very successfully incorporated CBPR in her program of research. She actually has a forthcoming paper on CBPR titled Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Developmental Neuroscience, Practical Lessons from Community-Based Participatory Research. This paper is going to be coming out soon in Frontiers in Integrative Neuroscience. Once again, we're really delighted to have Kalina join us today. As the conversation goes along, feel free to enter any questions that you might have for Professor Michalska into the chat box. We'll be collecting these questions, and I'll be asking these questions on your behalf at the end. All right, so with all that being said, I'm going to just stop sharing my screen and then so we can bring Professor Michalska into the spotlight.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm really delighted to be here and I welcome your questions. This is very much, you can hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
This is very much the beginning stages of our lab's process. So as Cecilia mentioned, I'm an assistant professor and I direct the Kids Interaction and Neurodevelopment Lab here on campus, the KIND Lab. And none of the, at the outset, I want to say that none of this work would be possible without the support of the Health Disparity Center. It was really the Health Disparity Center that led me onto the journey of CBPR, and I would not have done so without the expertise, without the support, without the infrastructure of the Health Disparity Center. So thank you for that.
Great, yeah. So thank you for the introduction as well. So today what we will be doing is I'm going to ask some questions about CBPR, and then Professor Michalska would be answering those questions. But kind of along the way, all of you in the audience, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. So I'll just start with a more general question. Kalina, can you tell us a little bit more about what your general research program is, and how was it like before you incorporated CBPR in your line of work?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and I'm glad you asked that because it has changed pretty significantly. So the overall goal of our work is to understand how children understand the emotions of others. So we're interested in how do kids react to, interpret, understand other people's emotions. And we've been focused on fear and distress. So we've been focused on, how do children learn empathy, and we study brain development. And so we're trying to understand, like, how does the brain support emotional processes, and how does the brain support children understanding the feelings and emotions and thoughts of other people. And so at the moment, what we're doing is we're rooting that in our understanding of how kids acquire fear. So you can see somebody who's in distress and you can react in different ways, right? Like you can see that they're distressed and you can be motivated to help them. You can see that they're in distress and actually fear that maybe you're going to be hurt next, or it does nothing to you. And so we've been looking at these emotional processes. We've been looking at the brain systems. And currently we have a longitudinal study of 150 Mexican identifying Latina girls and their parents. And we study the neurocircuitry that underlines sort of fear and safety learning and its connection with empathy. And here, thanks to my students, really, we've been looking at how do sociocultural experiences influence these factors. So I came very much from a tradition, I'm trained as a developmental psychologist, and I came very much from a tradition of looking at individual differences. So I've been focused on individual differences that emerge early in childhood, like temperament, like different biologically based factors. And for the first time, we've started looking at sociocultural processes. So there's emerging work looking at sociocultural processes like abuse, like neglect, but there hasn't been much work that focuses specifically on minoritized youth and the kinds of stressors that are common for minoritized youth and their families. So we're looking at children's exposures to discrimination experiences. Our sample is 100% Mexican identifying Latina girls and their families. So we probed their discrimination experiences, their families' discrimination experiences. And also, really, thanks to my students, I've shifted away, maybe not away, completely away from, but my training has led me to focus on parameters of risk. So what are some risk factors? And I continue to do that. But thanks to my students, we're also taking a strength-based perspective. So we're looking at, what are the strengths that Latino families bring? What are some of the unique socialization experiences, the unique cultural values that contribute to emotional development, that could contribute to brain development, and that contribute to buffering some of the sociocultural experiences like discrimination. And the way that this work has really shifted. If you remember my job talk, Cecilia, the overarching question, like what brain systems underlie emotion understanding and how do they relate to like fear and threat and safety learning? But when I gave my talk here, I had published a number of papers looking at conduct disorder in kids. So I had observed across a number of papers that there are sex differences in how the brain and behavior are associated in girls versus boys. And so I was very interested to look at, what do girls look like with disruptive behavior, with conduct problems? And that was the study that I started here in the KIND lab. In talking to families were recruited. We have a screener. They screened into conduct disorder. They screened in. So this is conduct disorder is marked by disruptive behavior, disrespecting the rights of others, and that was the focus of the study. Families screened in for conduct disorder, and then in talking to them, however, and in doing the clinical interviews, it turned out they didn't really meet the criteria for conduct disorder. However, even though we didn't recruit for anxiety, they had really elevated levels of anxiety. They were highly elevated on social anxiety, on panic, on separation anxiety. We didn't recruit for that, but our sample is very high on all of these things. And so the focus on conduct disorder really shifted from, these are the brains of girls who have conduct disorder to, well, what are some of the cultural factors that might lead parents to interpret disruptive behavior in unique ways? So I'm continuing to do that work. I have a collaboration with my colleague Wanling Zhang at Yale, looking at cultural factors that influence how parents view conduct disorder. But it shifted to really thinking about, okay, we didn't recruit kids for anxiety, but they're presenting with highly elevated symptoms. And then I had the opportunity to apply for pilot funding through the Health Disparities Center, which I did with my colleague Rengin Firat, who's a sociologist. She's a neurosociologist. And CBPR methods are not new to psychology. They're very, very much new in neurosciences, but these are methods that have been utilized in sociology, in ethnography, in gender studies. Like, these are certainly not new techniques. And so Rengin had some exposure to these methods, and a condition for the health disparities pilot funding was that we have a community advisory board. So that was one of the conditions for the grant. So this was a couple of years ago now. This was like 4 years ago now. And I hadn't, that was the first time I had heard about it. I talked to Rengin, she had heard about it, she hadn't implemented it. And so it was because of that condition that we started incorporating CBPR methods, and I can go into that. And so, in other words, we shifted from a focus on conduct disorder to really thinking about why are anxiety levels so elevated, and is it really a disorder, or can we reconceptualize it as an adaptive response to structural inequity? And we did that thanks to listening to our participants, thanks to the Health Disparities Center, but it's very much a work in progress. So I welcome any questions.
Yeah, so that's really fantastic. I'm really glad kind of you covered the kind of trajectory of like how your program is kind of you're maintaining kind of like the core of what you're interested in studying, but then kind of by listening to your participants, and also you actually mentioned a few times that your students contributed a lot into the process, where they are kind of like picking up like really interesting features of the sample, or with the general environment, like the local community that we are in, and then kind of enrich the program in a lot of ways. So if I can follow up on like this kind of motivational piece, right? So what would you say is the most kind of the strongest reason for you to want to kind of pivot your research into incorporating more kind of community-based approaches? I mean, imagining, your program of research can still thrive without incorporating CBPR. But kind of, what are some of the more major factors that really kind of convince you that, oh, this is kind of a good way to go? And, really, you want to invest in it.
Yeah, I mean, I am on board all the way. I think, having learned about these approaches, I will never go back to not including them. And the biggest motivation really was that, as researchers, we're in such a bubble, myself included. I continue to be in a bubble, and we think that, we can identify the issues that are important. They might be important for the scientific community, maybe, right? But if we're doing work in the community, the questions that I had certainly were some questions that the community had, but they were not central. They were not. So then, who am I to tell people what's important and central for their life? And that was really transformative, actually, in speaking to communities and asking, what are the issues on your agenda? What are the questions that you're concerned about? What are, the problems that you want to solve? I'm not saying that I can solve them or address them or answer them. However, I can represent them better than if I think, well, I have the answers to what the issues actually are. And it's really a paradigm shift to, I again, like, I don't think I've gotten there fully, but it's a way, I think I'm on the way. It's a paradigm shift to centering the community's voices rather than saying, well, I can identify what the community needs are without speaking to them. So the big pivot was actually gaining more humility and trying to collaborate and communicate together with the community members to solve the issues that they care about, and as you said, I think the work can still be done. And so I've really shifted in that way. The other thing that is not lost on me is that, in doing the work on conduct disorder and conduct problems, there is still an element of stigma attached to, I'm coming into a community that I'm not part of, and I'm doing research on something, disruptive behavior. And in doing this work, I really reconceptualized it from something that included like a power dynamic that shouldn't be there. So I really began to move away a little bit, try to reconceptualize it as an adaptation and think about the community needs versus my own perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really good advice. And I think, what I get is that, sometimes researchers might seem to think, well, we know the best, or, we have the best research question, and then we, go into the community and then we test our hypotheses. But yeah, I mean, kind of learning from your experience, it really seemed like, some of the more relevant questions, or questions that would be of bigger significance, are questions that actually come from the community that researchers work with. I really kind of appreciate your mentioning of, like, humbling oneself, right? So, it's not that, we have all the greatest questions in the world. Some of the really good questions are actually, coming from the people who we work with. So, kind of a side question in regards to working with the community is, some researchers might be worried that, their research program might be derailed, from the main, theoretical approaches by kind of, listening too much to, others who might not be, for example, as familiar with the literature. Do you have any of those concerns at all? Or, if you do, like, how you address those?
I mean, certainly, it depends on where you are in your career, right? Like these kinds of issues came up when I was pretty early here as an assistant professor. You have to show evidence of productivity, you have to get grants, you have to, you have to be productive. So I can't dismiss that. That's certainly true, right? So you're on this path, you know how to write the papers that are within your wheelhouse. I was hired on my work on conduct disorder, maybe partly, I don't know if you can tell me, Cecilia, but, so that was a path that I was on, and that was definitely a concern. In the bigger scheme of things, if you're doing work in the community, I think that in the broader scheme of things, it's important to represent the community's needs. And so, yes, there is a period of adjustment, and it might mean that, productivity is slower. But if you think about like your career as, constituted of many chapters of a book, overall, the book will be more compelling, more relevant, more in line with community needs. And so even though like the individual chapters might be a little bit shorter or a little bit slower. So certainly that's a concern that needs to be balanced. But I think in the bigger scheme of things, it's worth it.
Yeah, I really like that idea of kind of taking a step back and, taking kind of like a bigger scope of, looking at research in general. And, we might be compelled to kind of still, use the more familiar tools that we have. But, it shouldn't stop us from kind of also keep an open mind to explore other avenues and research approaches that might actually, then, like you said, really expanded your research program in ways that probably, you might not have imagined as you begin to
I
work.
had never heard of a community advisory board before I started the project. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah. So yeah, we're constantly learning, and that's excellent. And so let's see. Oh yeah, so we have a really good question, which maybe we shouldn't wait until the end. So we have a question in the chat from Danielle. So the question is, when reviewing research using community-based samples, are there practices or ways to sift through the literature that actively go into the community to ask about what topics are important for them versus just sampling from the community? Kalina, do you have any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
that's a great question, Danielle. I think there are some ways, but I think that they're inadequate. And the reason is that communities of color are very rarely asked about their views on things, right? So when we began having conversations with our families, nobody had asked them before. Nobody had asked them about their experiences of discrimination on mental health. I'm starting a new project thinking about families' experiences of climate distress. Nobody has asked them about it. And so really their voices are underrepresented in research, and the research that's out there is biased. So you have to know that that they're underrepresented in the majority of work. That said, I think that there are places, maybe other than scientific research, things like not census data, but sort of survey-based measures that are not in the scientific literature, but are reports, reports from the county, reports from the state, educational reports. I think those maybe have representation for things like chronic illness, mental health, disease, and things like that. But that's a really good point. Cecilia, do you have other thoughts about that, or maybe Pamela?
I completely agree with your approach, and I myself haven't quite fully incorporated CBPR in my research, but I do think that there's depending on which field you're in, there might be a bigger or smaller literature pool that you can draw from, but some of the researchers that I work with at the School of Medicine, I think many of them have actually incorporated CBPR in their research, and it also seems like there's a good sizable body of work on what research topics are maybe important or maybe are already existing in the field that could really guide researchers in certain directions. So yeah, I guess my response is probably it depends on your specific field of research. But yeah, I do agree with what Kalina was saying.
And I guess maybe to add to that, maybe looking outside of psychology, so I learned a tremendous amount from Rangan Farhat, who's a sociologist. And so I really looked outside of my own discipline, which is psychology, which can be quite narrow, and neuroscience is even more narrow. So, looking outside to ethnographers, sociologists, experts in gender studies, and we have many here on campus who are really doing excellent work from a different vantage point. So maybe not from a psychological point of view, but from sociology, and that really, I learned a lot from scholars in gender studies as well, who had been taking similar approaches.
Yeah, that speaks to the value of collaborations or collaborative teams of researchers. And well, stay tuned for our workshop number 6, where we'll be actually having this in-person event where we're hoping to bring researchers from different disciplines together on campus to just chat with each other, what they're working on, and perhaps we'll learn more about how other disciplines actually approach CBPR. And yeah, and I completely agree with the value of collaborating with others who may not be directly trained in your own discipline of research. So I guess I have another question, which is related to the more practical side of things. Kalina, you've started working on CBPR research for a little bit, and can you kind of recall the very first 3 baby steps that you took to incorporate CBPR in your own research?
Yeah, so it was very important to me and to my grad students, and I see I see my one of our undergrad RAs is here too. It was very important for us to incorporate these methods, but I also wanted to start from a place that was realistic, so there's aspirational CBPR methods that other researchers have been employing, but then there's also, okay, what can we realistically do? Like what kind of budget do I have? What kind of manpower do I have? And then also being mindful of my own position as someone who's not a member of the community. So I started by reading more of the literature on so the Health Disparity Center had as a condition for the pilot grant the creation of a community advisory board. So I read about what is a community advisory board. And a community advisory board is essentially, the name kind of says it, is essentially a group of individuals from the community who advise on research protocols, on data collection, on interpretation of the data. And we had already started the study. So we had already started the study that was focused on conduct disorder in girls. I mentioned that we pivoted. I wouldn't say midway through, but 2 years into the study, we pivoted. And so it wasn't at the very beginning stages. I should have done it. If I had known about it, I would have benefited. So it was kind of, 2 years in. So I learned about what is it and how do I create one? And there were many different procedures and protocols for how to do that. And I wanted to pick one that's realistic and doable for my lab. So one can, ideally one would take a group of individuals who are interested parties in the community. So you could take, religious leaders, you can take people in policy or in the educational space, like really trusted members in the community. I didn't have those kinds of connections. I had maybe one or two, but not sufficient to really, try to make a case for it. So we started small. We started with an advisory board that was made up of participants from our own study. And so that was a baby step because, you know, maybe it wasn't the ideal makeup of what a community advisory board is. However, I had access to these mothers. We selected them from our ongoing longitudinal study. We selected them to represent a variety of socioeconomic status. Our focus changed to focus on anxiety symptoms. So we selected them to be diverse SES, diverse age, and also a range of anxiety symptoms of their girls. So we started with a sample that we had access to. The other thing that we did was we looked at these, you know, community-based participatory approaches encompass a wide variety of things. One of them is to think about your position in the research space. And of course, you know, I had done that, but I've done it really abstractly, right? And so I always was, another thing that led me on this path was, you know, we're studying a sample of Latina girls and their parents. I'm an immigrant to this country, but I'm certainly not Latina. I'm not Mexican identifying. I'm from Poland, grew up in Austria. And so I was at a conference. This was a pre-conference several years back, focused on these CBPR methods. And I was asking a group of Latino women who were doing research in Latinx communities, and they were talking about how to do it. And I asked them there, I'm like, how do I navigate doing research in a community that I'm not a member of? And their answer stuck with me. And they're like, you know, just do the work. Like, put in the time, show up, gain trust, just keep showing up, and just don't worry about it so much and do the work. And that stuck with me. So yes, I'm worried. Yes, it's an issue, but you know, so it stuck with me to just do the work. And so we created a positionality map. And so to do so, we really reflected on, you know, what is our position? And I had done that, you know, in my mind, but this was really like a more concrete exercise. And I outlined this in our paper led by Shayna Lascala, who's a student in sociology. And we laid out all of the research team's positions. So, you know, immigrant from Europe, you know, have no kids, you know, age bracket, socioeconomic status. We did that for each of the senior research team, and we also did that for our research participants. We started with our community advisory board. We didn't want to have 150 people to start because we wanted to keep it manageable. So we wrote down everybody's position across a variety of relevant demographics for our study. And then we explicitly stated how we think that these positions affect our research, right? So the fact that, you know, I'm an immigrant maybe allows me to understand, you know, some immigrant related experiences. The fact that I'm white grants me, you know, European descendant white grants me certain privileges that communities of color may not have access to. And so we wrote down each of these things, how my position might affect the research, how my students' position might affect their research, how my collaborators' position might affect the research. And that was a really important exercise, and we did it together in conversation with the community. So those, I think, you know, reading up about, you know, CBPR methods, thinking about what are the ones that I can realistically accomplish in my lab, given manpower, given funding, given timing, and then, you know, maybe, you know, engaging in exercises that allow you to think critically about your own position in the work and like how does your own position affect the research that you do. Those would be my baby steps.
Yeah, those sound like, you know, they're actually giant steps to me. So yeah, so, you know, I certainly understand that those are kind of like the beginning steps that you took. And yeah, I very much agree with kind of your idea on, like, you know, well, it has to be practical, right? So kind of balancing the kinds of resources, you know, that community that you're working with, like, you know, to what extent they are willing to commit time and effort into, you know, I'm guessing, you know, we certainly don't want to, you know, force them to do a lot of work for us, right? Or, the idea is more the reverse. So, we're trying to see, what we can do for them. And yeah, your comment on, positionality, and, I think that's like, a lot of self-reflections that, a researcher would have to kind of engage in herself in, the thinking process, who are you, and how, when you're in that community, what exactly is your role there? So yeah, those are really excellent advice. And I'm really glad that you have this paper coming out, so we can always refer back to the excellent, successful pathway that you've undertook. So speaking of resources, one question that I have for you is like, what's your suggestion for the kind of first resources? So let's say, I'm someone who's new to CBPR. Where do I even get started? Like, where do I pull my first resource from? As I start to think about, doing work with the community and doing work that involves the community. So yeah, what are some of your suggestions?
Yeah, that's a good question. The thing that really blew my mind is, which as a researcher, it's wild that I hadn't thought of it before. So the Community Advisory Board, we started by asking them very simple questions about our recruitment. And we just asked them, what do you think of our recruitment materials? What do you think of our flyer? How do you respond to that flyer? And they told me very frankly, like, this flyer is not well written, it's not engaging, it's not interesting. Maybe not in those words, but it's targeted towards a community audience, like it doesn't speak to us, it's stigmatizing. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And also, I can't believe I didn't ask them before. And so I think if you have limited resources, really, even if you don't have money for a community advisory board, simply a focus group. And you can start very small. We started really with our recruitment materials. I do think it's very important to compensate advisory board, even if it's a focus group or a community advisory board. So we were paying $50 an hour, and we also sent food to people's house, although that's tricky with budget because not all budgets allow food, but so we sent like pizza to people's house. This was over Zoom, and I think it's very, very important to pay families. In this new upcoming renewal that we're writing, I'd like to increase that amount to compensate more for their time. So I would, if it's possible, to start with simply a focus group, even if it's 5 people, and just get feedback. And it's surprising what you'll hear back about, when you ask people, what do you think of these stimuli? What do you think about the questions that we're asking? And you can start with just your recruitment, just your IRB, just, wherever you want to start with. It's very humbling, very informative, and really transformative. That's where I would put my money. So however much money you have, I would create a focus group.
Yeah, great. So yeah, starting with kind of hearing from, the community by talking directly to them. So yeah, and we have a question in the chat as well. Sarah Knapp, has work with the community made qualitative data more important in your work than before, besides informing, but as part of the research analysis?
Yeah, that's a good question, Sarah. Thank you. I was quantitatively trained, and so to date, I think the majority of the qualitative, so we made the decision in our community advisory panels to not collect data from participants. And that there are different approaches. Some people decide to collect data and other people don't. We decided not to because we didn't want to burden families with additional data. We wanted them to speak freely. We didn't record the sessions. We didn't collect data. We wanted to just have a dialogue and learn and listen. And so we made that decision early on. So we have, broad descriptions of the meetings, the goals of the meetings, but we didn't specifically collect data. And this is different than many other groups who have actually collected the qualitative data, summarized it, and published that. But I just wanted to listen, and I just wanted to take a step back and not center. It's easy to do, right? Not be like, okay, well, this will be another data point, or this will be another data paper. So I wanted to take a step back and listen. The qualitative data very much informed the choice of questionnaires. We adapted questionnaires. We replaced questionnaires to better reflect the experiences. So it very much informed it. I think that we haven't yet fully embraced qualitative data collection other than open-ended questions that we then sort of summarize. So we ask, for example, during COVID, we asked parents to open-endedly say, some of their thoughts that are associated. We were thinking about post-traumatic growth. We were thinking about like growth in the presence of traumatic experiences. So we had open-ended questions. So to that extent, we had qualitative data. We haven't yet ventured into like qualitative data aggregation and analysis. At the moment, it's really just informing our quantitative data. And it really has changed the questions that we're asking and what we include. So, immigration and immigration attitudes towards immigrants are very important. So we ask participants, would you feel comfortable disclosing your immigration status to the team? How would you feel if we asked you questions about your legal status? Would you, what are your fears? What are your concerns? So those kinds of discussions informed the kinds of questions that we ask. But I think, I would also want to partner with somebody with actual expertise in qualitative data collection that I don't have. But that's a good question. So maybe it's a stepping stone, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for your question as well. So with that, I would actually like to open the floor up to the audience. So if anyone has any questions for Professor Michalska on CBPR, this is your time to ask questions. So does anyone have any questions at this point?
I have a question.
Yes, Pamela.
Kalina, could you speak more about some challenges and barriers you faced and maybe some tips for new CBPR researchers?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. The Health Disparity Center was very helpful in providing financial resources and also just enthusiasm. I'm like, am I doing the right thing? And they're like, yeah, this is interesting. Keep going. This is important. And that was very important. What has been incredibly difficult was the administrative infrastructure. And so, I want to pay our participants on time. I want to pay, Johanna participated here as well. We had an art therapy series. So we wanted to also like give back to the community. We wanted to, not just take their data and their insights and then maybe give them $50, but also give them the resources that they're asking for. And so many of them wanted no cost or low cost mental health services. I tried working with the medical school. I tried seeing whether I can organize free or low cost mental health services. That was really hard. Everybody's busy. People have other demands on their time. So then we decided that we were going to start an art therapy workshop series. We invited experts to lead these community events. Christoph Katriv was here. He took photographs of the events for us. And again, like, compensating community members for their time took 6-7 months. So the infrastructure makes reimbursement challenging, compensation challenging. And I think working with the communities, it's very, very important to establish trust. And so if, that's been one of the big roadblocks, I think, was administrative red tape. Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
believe creating a community advisory board is valuable to those who identify and are from the community? I think they're unbelievably valuable. And I really, I kick myself for not having included people, for not having done it sooner, you know? I think that people collectively have better ideas and are better able to address problems than on their own. I believe this in my research. You'll see all of my papers have like 10, 15 co-authors. I believe that in life, but also, you know, in these community advisory boards, discussing issues in a group of people, you're more likely as a group and as a collective to come up with viable ways to address these issues. So absolutely, I think they're highly valuable. As long as people are granted equal status, it's tricky to do that, you know. I think there are considerations. I think it's important to treat everyone as having equally important expertise. That's hard if you invite people to a space on campus. So we tried to think about like, what are some neutral spaces that we can create that don't highlight any power dynamics, that really, you know, try to make people feel on the same page and on the same team and as part of the same group. So thinking about space, thinking about relationships between people, those are all considerations that are important and relevant, but I think they're very valuable.
Yeah, and do you have any practical tips on, like, you know, how do you even reach out to you know, individuals in the community to begin to assemble a you know, advisory board? Because I'm imagining the process would be more like, you know, cold calling, you know, in marketing research, and, you know, calling people up, and, you know, in these days maybe like, you know, emailing people. But, you know, I'm just curious if like you have like any tips on, like, you know, what are some of the really effective strategies to kind of gain access to the community?
So that's why we started with participants from our own research study who've been with us for a while. And so we had already established trust. I don't think it's a good idea, to me, it doesn't seem like a good idea to just come into a community, especially if you're not part of that community. So for me to come into a space of, you know, Mexican identifying families and say, hey, you know, I'm looking for partners to inform our research, that doesn't seem like a viable or respectful place to start. I think you need to put in the time and establish trust, like keep showing up, show up to community events, show up to, you know, activities, events, and then make the request, you know. So either request people that you already have trust with, or establish the trust first. I don't think that, you know, because why should people trust that, you know, we have decades and centuries of exploiting individuals in the name of research. Why should they trust us, right? And so trying to take that perspective and regain that trust, I would do that first. So, which takes time.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And we have time for one question. So Takasha.
Hi, Kalina. So good to see you. And I'm so excited to hear about the direction your research has gone. I too am, you know, pretty new to learning about community-based participatory research, and it really resonates. And I think it's something that we need to do a better job of speaking to our students about, graduate students, medical students, so that they're aware of the importance of this type of research, right? Research with rather than research on communities. And so I guess I'm wondering, in what ways does the research, how do you bring your answers, your responses, your findings back to the community in a meaningful way that's helpful for the community? That's question one. Like, do you, certainly you write a paper, right? That's for us, but how does the community benefit from that? And then are there any efforts to go even further on an advocacy level to change policy, to bring this material to legislators so that they can see what the outcomes are and really affect change on a larger scale.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for coming, Takesha. It's nice to see you. It's been a couple of years. It's nice to see you in the space. Yeah, so as far as those are absolutely the long-term goals, right? But how do you get there? And so first, how do you bring the findings back? You're right. You know, we included actually our community advisory board as co-authors in our paper to acknowledge their expertise. Whether or not that's something that they're excited about, you know, maybe, but that doesn't, you know, doesn't address the health disparities in the region. We try, and Johanna's one of the RAs who is on my team. So we have newsletters that we publish twice a year. In those newsletters, we have our research findings. So we communicate our research findings. We also have a running list. So we have a spreadsheet of resources that we keep, that we update regularly with all of the free mental health resources, because the biggest issue that we have identified in my lab related to mental health is access to mental health resources for a variety of reasons. You know, I'm sure Bruce can speak to those. So for a variety of reasons, communities are under-resourced in mental health. And so we have a running list of what are the resources available, both for mental health, physical health, food, low-cost clinics, low-cost, you know, COVID shots, all of the, we have that, which is, you know, small, but it's within the scope of what we're able to provide. We also have raffles for back to school raffles. We have summer raffles. We have Thanksgiving raffles where participants can win like $100 of back to school supplies. As far as bringing back these findings to legislation, that's the ultimate goal, because I think the way that I see our research changing, you know, maybe policy at the local level, is to change the way that practitioners think about mental health and mental health disparities. So rather than, a lot of our families, as you know, believe that mental health is still quite stigmatizing. And so they don't want to seek resources for a variety of reasons. One is that they worry about stigma in their community. And so if practitioners can talk about mental health in different ways, that like, yes, this makes sense. Like the way that you are experiencing panic symptoms, you know, racing heart rate, recurring thoughts, rumination, actually, you know, is adaptive given all of these structural barriers. So if we can change how mental health practitioners speak about mental health needs in the community, and then also at the local level, I think there needs to be funding, like there needs to be culturally informed, you know, you're really at the, you know, you're at the core of this, but we need like way more funding. And in a state like California, which is so on board with mental health services, like our region is really staggeringly under-resourced. So that would be the end goal. But here too, I think we need these partners. And you know, there are some members of Congress that are certainly interested and willing to listen. That would be the long-term goal. But that also requires a bigger team of, yeah, I don't know. Do you have any other? I'd welcome your thoughts on that as well. Coachella Valley Free Clinic, absolutely. So we do advertise the Coachella Valley Free Clinic. Yeah. One of the, we often have medical residents doing rotations in our lab. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kalina. This is like very, very insightful. And I think, you know, we all are learning so much today. And so I want to invite everybody to give a round of applause to Kalina, virtual applause, I guess. And so I do want to remind everybody about, you know, our next workshop. So, you know, save the date. So we have an upcoming workshop in about 2 weeks, or exactly 2 weeks, March 14. So we'll be, you know, talking a little bit more about human subject research as well as the IRB process. Yeah, so I think, you know, we would really love to continue this conversation. So, you know, unfortunately, we're kind of out of time, but if anyone would like to stick around and ask questions, feel free to do so. But for those of you who have better things to do, feel free to also log off. So as a reminder, this workshop is being recorded, and so we'll make it available on the YouTube channel of HDR as well. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and hope you all have a good afternoon.